YouTube, this is Melanie from the Indefatigable Theist, and today I'm going to be responding to TBS's Creatio ex nihilo video series. A long time ago on my old channel, The Stinking Atheist, I made a response to one of his videos regarding that topic, and now that that's been out for a while and I've had some time to ponder the subject a bit more deeply, I decided I'd like to approach his arguments from a slightly different angle. I'd also like to dedicate some time in this video to responding to a few side issues in his video that I didn't respond to previously.
Anything material we've ever seen come into existence, babies, sculptures, cars, has been a reconfiguration of previously existing material which was once not that thing. This matters because the only way we've ever seen causality work is in the form of actions and reactions between stuff which already exists. We've never seen something which doesn't exist caused to begin existing. Things which don't exist can't be caused to do anything, since they aren't there to be influenced by a cause. You may be thinking, well, that's absurd. A carpenter obviously causes a previously non-existent table to begin existing. No, not in any literal sense. I mean, to say that a carpenter caused a table to exist is more or less a figure of speech, and it's a misleading one at that. The carpenter didn't cause the table to do anything, since the table didn't exist yet. What the carpenter did do was cause material, which was not the table, to become the table. This is how the table comes into existence, when non-table material is assembled by the carpenter into a table. If a thing ever did begin to exist, it's impossible to demonstrate that it could have been caused to do so by something that already exists. Riddle me this: how does something that exists cause something that doesn't exist to do anything, let alone start existing? The answer is it can't, because laws of causality only work between things that already exist. There is no such thing as a causal relationship between the existent and the non-existent. For causality to take place, you must have interaction. Think of any causal event and you'll find that there are always three necessary elements. A, something exerting causal influence, that which is doing the causing, the effector. B, something being influenced, that which the effector is acting upon, the affected. And C, that which results from the interaction of A and B, the effect. In the case of God creating the universe ex nihilo, we go right from A to C, skipping B altogether, the most important part, the part where something gets causally influenced. Dr. Craig believes there was literally nothing at all for God to causally influence. This is no different from admitting that God didn't causally influence anything, and that is no different from admitting that God didn't cause anything.
So we see the dilemma presented to us pretty clearly. Here's the main problem that I have. Scott's entire case against creatio ex nihilo seems to be based off of an argument from experience. Scott points out that we aren't aware of any case where a being is able to bring about an effect without exerting influence on previously existing material. But in doing this, he's taking a model for how causality works based on the observations of limited creatures, namely humans. When people like Hume and Aristotle came up with models for how causality works, that is, when they told us what needs to happen in order for an effect to be brought about, they were basing this off of how they understood the world around us. What Scott does is take causality models based off of the understanding from a limited universe, a universe with certain restrictions like time, physical laws, spatial dimensions, etc., and he applies these same models to God, a being who, by definition, has none of these restrictions, since he's the one who set the universe and all of its restrictions in place. With earthly causality, we're talking about limited, finite beings who can't even really bring things about in the literal sense. They can only bring about change. With God, we're talking about an unlimited, infinite being who brought everything about. Scott's main contention is that where nothing is affected, no effect shall obtain. Without a material cause, we can't have an efficient cause. If that's true, I think Scott has failed to show it. When he talks about our personal experience, like tables and babies, and how we don't literally bring these things about out of nothing, all he's showing us is that we have a very limited way of bringing about effects. We only know what it's like to affect something, bring about a change to it. We have no experience with bringing non-existent material into existence. I don't think any theist would have trouble in granting that. But the fact that we can't bring things about out of nothing in our realm does not imply in any way that it would be impossible for beings out of our realm to do this. But I don't think TBS's argument is just based off of experience. I mean, what about the part where he says that there's no causal relationship between nothing and something? So God couldn't have caused the universe because God is something and there's no relationship between him and nothing. Or what about the part where he says that admitting God didn't affect something is the same as admitting that he didn't cause anything? First of all, creatio ex nihilo doesn't entail a relationship between God and nothing. It doesn't mean that God took a chunk or a heap of nothing and reassembled it into something. That's obviously not even a coherent concept. But rather, God brought material from where there normally was none. But God brought about material where there was none from his own efficient nature and power. Nothing had nothing to do with it. God's nature and his power was what was included in the creation process. I think a distinction should also be made between affecting something and bringing about an effect. Affecting something is bringing about a change to it. Effecting something is bringing something about, which could be bringing about a change or bringing material out of non-material in the case of creatio ex nihilo. So saying that God didn't affect something is not the same as saying that he didn't bring about an effect, which is also distinguished from saying that he didn't cause something. And obviously we don't know what it's like to create from our own power or nature, which I think is where the experience part of TBS's argument comes into play. Now regarding that first part, where God is able to bring forth material out of nothing, Craig actually has a pretty interesting article on that. I agree with Scott that Craig's response to him was not very good and really rude, but after he composed that first paper to TBS, somebody else also asked him about Scott's arguments, and he kind of rephrased his arguments and objections, and Craig responded again. Only this time, in my opinion, he did a much better job. I'm not really sure what's up with that, if it was like a rough draft before a masterpiece moment, but I'll put the link to that article in the description. Let me read you the highlights of that.
The question then is whether there is a conflict between the principle ex nihilo nihil fit and creatio ex nihilo. Clearly not, for in creatio ex nihilo there is an efficient cause of the effect, whereas the principle ex nihilo nihil fit concerns something's beginnings to be in the absence of any sort of cause. Your conclusion assumes that in creatio ex nihilo, the potentiality of the universe's existence must lie impossibly in the nothingness that preceded it. But, as Thomas Aquinas pointed out, in creatio ex nihilo, the potentiality of the universe lay in the power of God to create it. Since God has the power to create the universe, then even in the state of affairs of God's existing alone, there is the potential for a universe to exist. That potential resides not in some non-existent object or in nothing, but in God himself and his ability to cause the universe.
Okay, now let me jump to a side point in TBS's video about the KCA.
So, for the four of you on YouTube who have not heard the Kalam cosmological argument, it goes like this. Premise 1, anything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, the universe has a cause. Psst, and by the way, that cause is God. Now, it should go without saying that the easiest and most obvious way to refute this argument is to point out that even if you completely grant the conclusion of the argument as true, that doesn't lead you to God. Nothing about the universe having a cause means that there exists a personal, emotional, disembodied mind with moral concerns, infinite knowledge, and the superpower of causing events to occur just by thinking them. And of course, every theological attempt to bridge that gap, at least every attempt I'm aware of, has failed miserably.
I'm kind of astonished Scott said all that. Really? Has he ever read an article or any of Craig's books or any of his debates defending the KCA? Craig spends a ridiculous amount of time explaining why, if there is a cause for the universe, it would have to be a powerful and intelligent and personal being.
Now, it's obvious that the universe exists. It therefore follows that the universe has an explanation of its existence. But what sort of explanation is it? Well, it seems plausible that if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is an external, transcendent, personal cause. Why? Because the cause in this case must be greater than the universe. Think of the universe, all of space and time. So the cause of the universe must be beyond space and time. Therefore, it cannot be physical and material. Now, there are only two kinds of things that fit that description. Either abstract objects, like numbers, or else an intelligent mind. But abstract objects can't cause anything. Therefore, it follows that the explanation of the universe is an external, transcendent, personal cause, which is what everyone means by God. Such a transcendent cause must possess a number of striking properties. As the cause of space and time, this cause must transcend space and time, and therefore exist non-temporally and non-spatially, at least without the universe. This cause must therefore be changeless and immaterial, since something can be timeless only if it is unchanging, and something can be unchanging only if it is immaterial. It must also be unimaginably powerful, since it created all matter and energy, space and time. Finally, and most remarkably, such a transcendent cause must be personal. Two reasons can be given for this conclusion. First, the only entities we know of which can be timeless and immaterial are either minds or abstract objects like numbers. But abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. Therefore, the transcendent cause of the origin of the universe must be an unembodied mind.
To his credit, Scott does add the all attempts that I'm aware of to bridge that gap have failed part, but if you had heard Craig's thoughts on this, you think he might add a side note, like, oh yeah, and Craig does talk about why the cause would have to be God every single time he discusses the KCA, I'm just not convinced by that, or something like that.
What does science have to say regarding Kalam's other premise? I mean, it seems highly intuitive that anything which begins to exist has a cause, but thermodynamics tells us something a little different. What it tells us is that nothing actually begins to exist. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy, which is what everything is made out of, even matter, even atoms, can be neither created nor destroyed. It only changes form. So how can we possibly know that anything which begins to exist has a cause when we have no verifiable account of anything ever beginning to exist?
The first law was intended to describe the way the universe around us functions. In our universe, matter cannot be created or destroyed, but the first law was not meant to be applied to creatures out of our world, even ones leading up to the creation of it. If God existed outside of our universe and created the matter and energy of which it is now composed, the first law of thermodynamics does not apply to him. All the first law shows us is that no process can take place in our already existent universe that can create or destroy matter or energy. And TBS should well know that observation is not necessary in order to know something is true. For example, we know that time began to exist even if we can't personally witness it beginning. The reason is that if time did not begin to exist and it stretched on infinitely, then we couldn't be located at any particular point in time now. Infinity has no starting point and it has no end point. So if time was eternal, then the past must stretch on infinitely, and then an infinite number of things would have occurred in the past. But then, of course, we couldn't have reached this particular point now. We couldn't be experiencing this moment because there's no way we could have ever reached it. In this way, we know that time had a starting point, so time literally did begin to exist. Whether or not we observed it begin to exist is irrelevant, which is why I find Scott's entire case against creatio ex nihilo flawed. Now there's something interesting about the fact that time began to exist. Time is not composed of any kind of material, so nothing could have exerted any force on any type of material in order to bring about time. Material was not used in the creation of time. Could that mean that time must have begun to exist ex nihilo?